Slaphead and the Giraffe podcast. Health, fitness, and fighting with Chris and Darren.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 25 of the Slaphead and the Giraffe podcast. We are joined by Anuratha Vitachi. Is that how you connect?
More or less. Good enough.
Global media pioneer and co-founder of One World charity. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
I've completely ignored my co-host.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Nothing new there.
If nothing else, I can be here to say that this episode is brought to you by three sponsors: optimalstate.co.uk, lisa.co.uk, and My Web Designers, designweb.co.uk. Carry on now. You can carry on ignoring me and do whatever you want to do.
So, Anuratha, how do you become a global media pioneer? It's a very broad question, right?
Well, it helps to be born into a country which is suffering a lot with a lot of global injustice and poverty. And my parents were both journalists. My father was what would have been called a human rights activist if the term had been coined then. Mm-hmm. And by the time I was 11, I'd published my first piece on human rights in a national newspaper. And we were brought up in this kind of atmosphere of what you had to do was fight for justice and equality for everybody, and not and speak truth to power, basically, and not just take lying down just because somebody in the government told you.
Where were you born?
In Sri Lanka. And by the time I was 13, there were sort of daily kidnap threats to me and threats to murder my dad and all this. So one night when he'd just been tipped off that his passport was going to be taken away, which means he would have been chucked into jail and never heard of again without a trial, you know, he bundled us on a plane that night. And I remember him saying, okay, you can take one book, one toy and a change of clothes. And we fled. And
do you remember the book?
I was going to say,
that's the book.
Mine would probably be Slash's autobiography. I'm assuming yours wasn't there. Exactly. Gobelino, the Witch's Cat, mine would be. I like that book.
It was hard because I was a very bookish child even then, you know. But anyway, we ended up in Singapore, there was a flight to that night at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were there for 3 days, and we arrived with no money. Mm-hmm. And you know, what do? You know, and so my dad had a limo on the grounds that with a limo, you don't have to pay till the end of the month. And he said to the limo driver, take us to the fanciest hotel in Singapore, which was, I think, the Goodwood or something. And when we walked in, this batch of little refugees, he said, the Princess Suite, please. You see, so again, nobody asked any questions. So I remember going and I actually remember standing there and thinking, ooh, this is nice, you know. And then 3 days later, the International Press Institute, which is based in Zurich, in Switzerland, said, thank God we found you. Because in those days, we didn't have email or any of these things. They tracked you down. And would you like to take on this new job they just created for him of the Asian director looking out for press censorship all over Asia, setting up press institutes to guard the right of people to speak up against their governments if necessary or whoever. And my dad said, yes, send so many $1,000s at once. So we paid all the bills, bought a tiny little car, and we trundled up to Malaysia. And we lived in Malaysia. And my dad used to fly around all over the world all the time, setting up press institutes to guard the freedom of speech.
Wow, what an amazing father.
Yeah, he was. And so we were brought up with this sense that, you know, you had to fight for people's rights. And as I grew up, I started to realize that in my 20s, that actually one of the things that was the biggest downer for people and was actually going to destroy the planet, but nobody was talking about it then, was climate change. Mm-hmm. And one day when I went to collect my dad from the airport, he's always arriving in London and saying, collect me. There was this very beautiful, elegant woman with him, rather frail looking, older woman, younger than I am now, I have to say, or about the same age. And he said, take her bags for her. You know, and so I picked up the bags duly, I was 20-something, you know, and carried the bags out to the car. And he said, have you read her book, Only One Earth? And I said, never heard of it. He said, go and read it. And that predicted, and that was written in 1972, and that predicted by the year 2005, the carbon level would be this much, exactly right. that by the year 2000 the temperature would be have risen globally to 0.5. Exactly right. She predicted all that. She was a economist and scientist, and it was a mind-blowing book. And I remember thinking then, oh my God, we're all going to fry, and nobody's going to know because none of us knows about this stuff.
What would you say to the climate change deniers that point to the kind of natural cycles of the Earth of warming up and cooling down?
Yeah, but there's natural and natural. I mean, if your child has a toothache one day, that's fine, but and it has mild temperature and it's over next day. But if the child gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, you don't just say, oh, well, children get fevers. You take them to the doctor. You do something about it. Or your house has a fire in the fireplace. You don't worry about it. The room's warmer. But the house catches fire, you call the fire engine. You don't just sit there. And this is way beyond any natural cycle. 2015 is the hottest year globally, on average, on record. And of the last, 14 years or something, there's only been 1 year that hasn't been record level. There's no question about it.
I think I tweeted and copied you guys in. I think they said 30 years.
More than likely. More than likely. So
on the downside, it's just a shame it hasn't hit England and
it
had a
hasn't
nice
hit.
warm summer.
Specific.
Exactly. Yeah.
it actually has hit even here, in the sense that people are beginning to grow wine here, which they certainly don't think
There are
about.
some nice English wines. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
But they are increasingly switching. People are diversifying to growing wine here. Well, that's a sign.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if in a country like England, which is really cold usually and is getting warm enough to be more like Mediterranean climate, what is happening to places which are already hot? And the way we're going now, even if all the pledges at the UN climate talks and all these things are carried out, right, so far, it will warm to nearly 3 degrees, which means that this is now 1 degree up. This will be three times as hot as now.
1 degree up from what?
From pre-industrial levels. It's 1 degree up, and as a global average temperature. So it's not in one place.
So do you think the solution is carbon control, or is it trying to find now a scientific solution?
It's all of these. It's both. Well, let me say this. First of all, just to finish my previous point, if it's 3 degrees up on average, or 2.7 to be more precise, 3.3 degrees up on average, certain parts of the world, like Britain, will be not so bad because it's a small island, there's water around, things sort of get made temperate. But say take somebody trying to survive in the middle of Africa. Can you imagine? It'll be 6 degrees, and that means that nothing will grow.
Yeah.
There will be huge famine, there will be huge starvation, and that's already happening. And one of the questions that people often ask is, are political reactions, like in Syria, is that anything to do with climate change?
Yeah.
And I gather Prince Charles...
We'll come on to that one.
Okay,
we won't
fine.
cover that before.
Okay.
We'll do that when Chris sings fan questions to us.
Okay, fine.
We'll come on to
Sure,
I've got a separate question actually,
Okay,
from what
do
you were
it.
talking about. Someone said to me the other day about this actually.
Yeah.
I can't remember the country, but what would be the first country to disappear, for want of a better phrase, if waters rise and...
Well, I don't know exactly the first one, but certainly all the little islands, in the Maldives, those sort of islands, and lots of little islands. They're doomed already.
Right.
There's no way back already for many of these islands.
Do you think we have a problem with the media representation? Because I was watching the BBC News the other day, and the BBC do this thing of having balance, right? So they have a climate change expert and then a denier. And I feel like if you want balance, you should have 100 experts and one denier, because then that's representative.
In fact, you'd have to have 10,000 experts in one or 100,000 experts in one denier to get a balance. You're right. You're absolutely right. And in fact, the BBC was really severely wrapped over the knuckles in a report for this false balance. Because it's a false balance. You know, it's like somebody says the world is flat. I'm sure there are a few people around who still say the world is flat, right? The earth is flat. And then have every, I mean, it's just nonsense. And there are, of course, a lot of people who are being paid by groups to actually put this stuff out because it
By
helps.
industry and
Exactly.
big corporations.
Exactly.
I've heard American politicians, who's the guy with the terrible hair that's running? Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Someone said to him, isn't our environment delicate? And he said, yes, but our economy and our industry are delicate as well. It's like, that's not the same. It's not the same. They can be fixed. You know, the economy recovers in a very different way.
Yeah.
But one thing I really ought to say, you know, I have been a passionate advocate for doing something about the climate and doing something about human rights, because the two go together, absolutely together. They're not one or the other, it's together, for decades now. But I kind of reached a point when I felt quite despairing, especially after Copenhagen, when really everybody backtracked, nobody did anything. And the last few years. But in the last year or two, I actually feel hope. I think things are changing. Of course, the politicians will take ages to come around, but something is changing. People really know it now, and they, you know, most people don't deny it now. Kids know it now. You know, it's their generation that's going to really suffer. Kids born in this century, born since you know, in the 21st century, they will probably live 100 years, or they should be able to live 100 years. But will they? And what kind of life will they face? You know, it's dire. And parents worry. You know, and lots of people are beginning to worry now. And I think there are two main causes of hope I have. One is that there is a big divestment movement going on. I don't know if you've come across that.
No.
Okay, so where a lot of universities and the Bank of England, lots, and the Church of England, you know, lots of institutions are either already have or are thinking about taking their shares out of oil companies.
Yeah.
So suddenly the oil companies' shares are beginning to tumble there anyway, because the price is coming. So as the oil companies are not being supported by everybody, by all our money, you know, funds from taxpayers, all kinds of people's money is not propping up the oil companies anymore. And do you know that governments around the world, using our taxpayers' money, are propping up the oil companies? Do you know that 8% usually of a country's national budget is given to the fossil fuel industry as a subsidy? Can you imagine? That money could go to the National Health Service or to support disabled people. Instead, we are giving the money to oil companies. It's unbelievable, which means that up till now, the oil company says, we can provide you energy for X pounds, but these environmentalists, they're so expensive, you know, renewable. But it's only because the oil companies' costs are being artificially subsidized by taxpayers' money. Trillions of pounds around the world, trillions are being given every year to the oil companies to artificially lower their prices. This is insane, isn't it? Insane. If we gave even 1% of that to renewables, renewables would be laughing. And in fact, in India, they've decided that now legally, that 1% of the national budget, not 8 or 10, you know, as to the oil companies, but 1% will be given to support renewables. And already the economic picture has changed, and renewables are worth investing in now.
You're talking about what gives you hope. Does new technology give you hope? Like seeing electric cars?
Yes, but these are all...
Small windmills?
Yes, definitely. But these are all relatively small, but they're all like things in the right direction. And as people engage with small things, then they kind of understand more and more. So that makes them wake up to all these other things, which is great. And then they get engaged, and then they start to realize all the things they could change and actually make their lives better. It's not like, I think it used to be assumed that you have a worse lifestyle, that you have a miserable life, you know, you had got to go back to the Stone Age. No, I mean, you know, we have a hybrid car. It's a lot nicer to drive than the old cars we used to have.
I saw a Tesla the other day and got to sit in one. I thought,
wow.
This is nice. That would be quite expensive at the moment, but that would be the dream.
And is it BMW i8s?
Wow, that's an incredible car.
I think that Tesla and BMW are the first crossover where they are cars that you could actually want. You know, with all due respect, some of the...
I do love your Prius, but it's a little ugly.
But some of the...
What's the word? Aesthetically challenged, or?
Yeah, I think there's a... I think these are the first two cars that you could actually desire from a car point of view.
Yeah, as a car
that
lover.
are also that are also electric. So I think, particularly for me, I think the Tesla's like out of range. But I think particularly, I don't know how much BMW is. I'm sure that is as well. But it actually looks like a...
And you've seen like the LA fashion now among celebrities is they've all got the electric cars and to show their environmentalism.
Yeah,
It's good to see.
yeah. Is that the right word? Environmentalism.
Yeah, that's
Is that the right word?
Yeah, fine.
Oh,
Nothing wrong
Some of
with
us
it.
read books.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right, so we should probably move off global warming a little bit. We'll probably circle back to it. Have you got? Let's hit some of our questions.
First, before we do, I'm just going to read out a little list. I did put this on Twitter, but I'm just going to read a little list of people. I need to look at what your proper name is. I'm not used to calling you
Anuradha.
that. Anuradha. So I'm the one who's known you for years, but calling you something completely different. Anuradha has met President Mikhail Gorbachev, Gordon Brown, Al Gore. This is not exclusive list. I'm just cherry picking some. David Miliband, Neil Kinnock, Ed Miliband, Jeremy Corbyn, Chelsea Clinton. I like how Chelsea Clinton's in the middle of this bit. This is one that interests me in particular. The Dalai Lama. Tell me about him.
All right.
That's a very broad question.
I know, but this is going to sound really, really naive. I don't know that much about him other than he's obviously like a spiritual leader, but I don't actually know, like, what does he do day to day?
Well, let me tell you a bit about him.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is that he's like a lovely uncle who turns up at the family party. He's very jolly. He's very warm.
incredible
Does he wear orange all the time?
Yeah,
All
his
the
saffron robes.
Yeah,
right,
yes.
okay, yeah.
And
I'm gonna sound
all
so
kind of,
stupid here,
it's
right?
sort
Yeah,
of maroonish
Buddhist.
coloured. It's a mixture of
Right,
maroon
okay.
and and you know, once he sort of slapped me on the arm like this in a cheery way. It's so hard, my arm really hurt. I mean, he's very kind of warm and funny and self-deprecating, and he's just a lovely person to have around. So the second thing is that underneath all that, of course, he's deeply, deeply serious.
Yeah.
And when when I was with him at a conference once, when, you know, very high level conference, lots of, you know, famous people, and this guy broke in and started ranting and shouting and saying, why don't you change it? And what about the people who are really poor? And, you know, and so of course the security people came in and grabbed him and muscled out. Everybody's like, they shouldn't behave like this in front of the Dalai. And the Dalai Lama made a beautiful speech, you know, very warm and very sad, and said, you know, people respond like this because they're not being heard.
Yeah.
They're not being listened to. We should listen, not throw him out. We should he didn't say don't throw him out, because then that would be being unkind to the organisers who are only trying their best, you know. But it was like, we should listen. And so the organisers actually sent somebody to talk to him, and, you know, afterwards. And I also talked to him afterwards. And, you know, it was very inclusive. It wasn't like this, you know. And I did a film interview with him once, and he talked about nonviolence and the importance of nonviolence. Everybody says, oh, we don't like violence, we like peace. But some people really mean it. Even if things are really tough, they don't do violence. And he said, you know,
You're
if...
talking to a British champion here.
I'm a
No,
pacifist.
listen, let me finish. He had a tattooed, partly bald bloke on top of him hitting him, and he did nothing for 8 minutes. We've all seen the video. It's like 8 minutes long, and then he thought, "Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll just finish."
Yes, so and then after the interview, I asked him if I could have some private time with him.
Yeah.
And I did, and he was absolutely wonderful, because he and my dad actually shared a peace prize. It was the Nobel Prize tends to be very Western. This was Asian equivalent of the Nobel. And he wasn't allowed to leave the country, the Dalai Lama. So his brother actually came and collected with my dad. And there's pictures of him, the Dalai Lama's brother and my dad together getting this award. And his was for peace, you know, because he was so nonviolent. My dad was for reporting, for courageous reporting about what actually happens to people. And that's really what Peter and I have tried to do ever since, to follow in my dad's footsteps. and really try and make films or do writing or speaking or whatever we do, to follow in my dad's footsteps, to use different kinds of media to bring about equality and peace and justice.
So you're more used to my stupid questions on a day-to-day basis. And I try and keep them off the podcast sometimes. But so I should probably say that I actually know you because I've been training you for 3 years.
Yeah.
So and you sent through your biog,
Yeah.
so we could prep a little bit for this with the people that you've met and this, that, and the other. And I did kind of reply and said it's taken me 3 years to realise I should probably be paying you for personal training. But anyway.
You get to spend an hour every week with this
I know.
incredibly
Exactly,
interesting person.
That's what I mean.
You're stuck with him for an hour, really.
Yeah.
No,
Funny
it's
thing is, I come out of all my silly little facts, and every so often I see her look at me as if to think,
Just shaking her
not-
head in disbelief.
that's not actually true, but I'm just going to nod and just chew me for a minute.
I don't know if it's too personal, but do you mind if I ask you what your religious
My
beliefs
religion.
are?
I'm pretty eclectic.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with the Dalai Lama listening to him talking about how Christianity, for example, and Buddhism overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter's a Christian and I'm a Buddhist in the sense that those are the traditions we were brought up in.
Yeah.
But I see so much overlap, and Peter, the same, and with so many religions,
Yeah.
and with so many non-religious people who are atheists, we have very similar values. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about the detail, the outer side, the material side, if you like, of any of these things, because they're dependent on where you grow up and what the practices and customs are. What's behind it all, what's underneath it all, do you try to react to people with understanding, or do you just knee-jerk bash them? Or do you assume that they're always wrong and you're always right? These are the things that are important. Do you try and see the other person as a person like yourself? And this thing, this gesture, it means the divinity within me honors the divinity within you. So it's an equalizing
It's a
thing.
martial artsy job. Do you have to?
Yeah, well, yoga, you
Kind
was.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And also at the end of fights, quite often they're.
Yeah, bows each
don't
other
they?
and show respect.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I went on a bit of a spiritual journey of my own, trying to figure out what I believed. And I always found the problem with the kind of Christianity, very specifically Christianity or Catholicism, more specifically, was it in a lot of ways it required quite literal belief of certain things, of miracles.
Yeah.
A prime example, and I always struggled with that. And then when I looked into Buddhism, you have the Dalai Lama himself going, if you don't believe it, doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just what it represents.
Exactly.
I thought it's so refreshing.
And one of the things he often says when he starts to speak, or at the end of a speech, which I think is wonderful, and I often say a version, not that I think I'm like the Dalai Lama, I wish I was, but I of course I'm not, but is if anything I have said is useful to you, put it into practice.
Yeah.
If it doesn't relate to you, just forget it. Don't react to it. Either if it's good for you from your point of view, it makes sense, then don't just theorize about it, do it. And if it doesn't relate to you, just forget about it. I think it's brilliant.
I'm going to jump into a question.
Yeah, okay.
Fan question, as Chris likes to call them.
I'm not singing this week.
It's not really right. No, he sung on the last one. We did opera, didn't we? We went. We went. You're too. What's the right word? Professional for us to sing to.
Oh, come.
We're too tone deaf.
Yeah. And also, it's not really right when it's.
Before we go into your question,
Oh, yeah.
I'll just mention to our listeners that Darren sat on a cushion.
I'm going to just say that
At the Christmas party, Darren gets the kids' table with the
it's like when you see me, it makes you feel taller, doesn't it?
Yeah, I feel like a giant when you're
Or
around.
one of the only times it makes you feel a little bit younger. Chris
It's
is
not
only
having a pop
30.
at me.
He's only 30, believe it or not. So I get bits of like my intelligence from these two largely, and Giz wanted to know what Afghanistan was all about. So she effectively wanted to know why we were ever in Afghanistan, what we did and whatever. So she actually said to me, "Oh, why don't you ask Tara, she'll tell you, and then you can break it down to me." So I came along one session, I said, "Oh, Giz wants to know what's going on in Afghanistan."
It's such a broad question.
I know, yeah.
What's going on?
Why it is, yeah, exactly, yeah. Why it is.
Russians
why,
were
why
there.
Yeah, exactly. But it was that. It was all.
Yeah.
I knew a bit about, like, is it Mujahideen before, and I knew a bit about that kind of stuff, but I didn't really know, and like, why we're still there and everything. And she said, "Oh yeah, ask Tara, she'll tell you." So I'm going to carry on calling you Tara now because this is just all the way through, I'm afraid. So Tara actually wrote a 12 bullet point bit, because she knows that my concentration span on anything, particularly if I'm reading it, doesn't really go beyond the
Covering
page.
in at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It comes around. So Tara actually does a 12 bullet point thing on starting off with like the Mujahideen, and etc. Going right through. Sent it to me. I shared it with Giz. Giz shared it with her work colleagues, and it ended up going like semi-viral. Literally, it had probably been posted 10 separate times backwards. So I reckon probably about 5,000 people in total. I'm going to do a question.
Yeah,
I'm going for the Gizzy's question. What does Tara think to Prince Charles' comments that there's a direct correlation between climate change and the rise in extremism?
Well, what I would say is that there is a correlation.
Right.
How direct you want to call it is a matter of, it's a bit scholarly, whether you want to say it's indirect or direct. But I don't think it's just Prince Charles who says this. There was a big study done by the National Academy of Sciences in America,
Right.
which, is saying the same thing. And somebody I forgot to say I'd met was President Jimmy Carter.
Right.
And he, before he became so ill, he's got cancer and he's very, very ill. The last few years, he's really been focusing on the Middle East and what's happening there and how to bring about peace. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, really. And I asked him about climate change and the Middle East, and he said, of course, climate change is just going to exacerbate the tensions that are there.
What, because they're not getting the food, or?
Well, all these things. I mean, you can say on one level, I used to think that it was basically if a river is drying up, there's not enough water, everybody's going to fight over the water. And that's true, but that's pretty local. But on a bigger scale, what happens is that as the food crops, even if you have a crop, if the plants have been heat stressed, it'll give out far less goodness, maybe 30% less or half. And people can't survive on that because they either have to sell it and get a bit of profit to get the other things, and it doesn't make a profit anymore. There isn't enough to go around. Or they haven't even got enough because the crops just completely fell. So the children start to starve. The families start to starve. Or if it's not that bad, the children already suffer because if a child doesn't get enough nutrition, their immune systems don't work properly. And so they become sick to everything else. So everything starts to become like a perfect storm. Everything gets worse and worse and worse. When the children start to die, everybody knows that we're all hardwired to further our reproduce and for the next generation, the next generation. That's how human life works. When people see all their children start to suffer, they know they can't survive there, and so they move. So in Syria, for example, the problem started when there was the worst drought Syria's ever known, and it went on for years. And guess what? All these people moved out of the countryside to the cities. The cities were then throbbing with people who had no jobs, no place to live, and these huge shanty towns started to develop up. And of course, these are absolutely ripe for people to feel desperate, frightened, angry. Why isn't anybody sorting them out? Assad wasn't helping to solve their problems. They're just the poor people, what does he care? And anyway, what's he supposed to do? So these become hotbeds of disaffection. And then, of course, people who want to use violence and extremism, of course they'll find a foothold because nobody's helping.
Just linking back to that last question, is Prince Charles 100% good for the climate change movement, or is he kind of like, does he 10% put his foot in it like his dad, or is he kind of, do you think he's all good?
I think he is very, very good in the sense that who else actually puts their head above the parapet like this? Who else does it? I mean, he's very brave to do it, and he's absolutely amazing to do it. And did I tell you this?
Have you met him? I was going to say that. That was my next question.
I've met him several times. And he invited me to lunch at his house at Highgrove.
Oh, did he?
And he was very sweet. They made vegetarian food. I mean, I'm not a veggie actually.
Yeah.
Peter is, but in case, rather than embarrass me,
Yeah.
everybody there had to eat vegetarian food. And it was absolutely delicious. So veggie food like that, I would be happy to be a vegetarian. But he was very thoughtful. He really listened to everything. And there's one area I'm not on the same page with as him, but lots of environmentalists are, which is population. I have a different view. And if you want to know about population or the latest figures and thinking about it, I suggest you go to George Monbiot, Monbiot, and look at his latest piece, which he came out with just a week or two ago, and it's really, really good.
Well, we should probably ask you about your charity. You are the co-founder of One World.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit of the overview of the charity. What's the goal?
Well, it started off as wanting to use the internet, which is such a miraculous thing, to get across the points of view of people, the people at the sharp end, like people who are in poor countries who never get their voices heard. Because let's face it, the media, the mainstream media, were really the kind of Murdoch type media who were there to use people as buying machines. So they have celebrities because they buy stuff about celebrities. It's kind of rubbish, really. And the same few people get circulated all the time, which is why, even though you keep asking me about celebs, I don't really, I don't really approve of celebrities and all that for its own sake, because I think there's something fundamentally worrying about this whole celebrity culture, which is that some people are put on pedestals and other people are made to feel inferior. And my whole thing is, should all feel equal, because we're all equal as human beings. And of course, some people have worked very hard, trained very hard, and have talents they've honed, like you doing your boxing, or Darren's a very good trainer. But the thing is that if people are good at something and they show that by really working hard at something, they do something, then they can be a good role model, and I'm all in favor of good role models. So I think that, I think that's what Prince Charles, for instance, is trying to be a good role model in some ways.
What inspired you to start your foundation to begin with, and how did you grow it?
Well, Pete and I, between us, had tried every form of media we could think of, whether, in my case, it was writing books, writing articles all over the world, writing UN reports, in Peter's case making films, and then later both of us making films together, and then Peter went on to do all kinds of hypertext things, and we were just exploring these different media, all as ways of using media for global justice, for eradicating poverty, to bring about better health for kids, all these things. And then when we stumbled on the internet, we were ecstatic. I remember writing to one of our daughters and saying, "At last I know what I want to do when I grow up," because this has everything. It has pictures, it has sound, it has text, but the best thing about it is that it's a catalytic thing, by which I mean you don't just have an object that you make and you put it on, that's it. You can make a space that catalyzes other people's work, like the internet itself is a catalytic thing that supports everybody else. So what we did was we created One World, not as just like a bulletin board which told you the answers in our great opinion, but we created a space for all the people who really knew stuff, like the NGOs and the people they work with. So say Oxfam and the people they work with in the villages, in the mountains, to actually speak. And that's what we wanted to do. So our trustees would sometimes get a little bit, why aren't we saying what we think? Well, actually, we don't know that much. We know a certain amount, but we know enough to know a good thing when we see one, and to encourage them to put their stuff on. So we started by having like 20 groups, that we really felt were really good groups that knew what they were talking about. New Internationalist magazine on global politics, Oxfam, ActionAid, the British government's international department, Department for International Affairs. My secretary built their first website, and the first website for Amnesty, and all these people were Save the Children was made by Sue, who lived down the village and she was brilliant. And there's an example of somebody who leaves school at 16, but gets this stuff and supports all these huge organizations. But before we knew it, we weren't running websites and a portal where we collected the best bits and put it in the middle. For 20 groups, it was hundreds and hundreds of people wrote to us from all over the world saying, can we join? Can we be partners? It was supposed to be a 3 days a week job for one person. Before we knew it, we were swamped by hundreds of requests from all over the world. So we grew the team. We took on a new person every month. And the very first person I hired as an editor like this was a guy who's very famous now in the environmental movement. Some people love him, some people hate him, but called Mark Linus, who is a great climate champion.
Yeah.
And so after a while, I was very unhappy with this just growing, because I said, again, it's like we are the bee's knees, we're growing. I hate this. And so we devolved it into a network, an equal power distributed network of centers around the world. And at the kind of peak of the time we were running it, there were 13 centers around the world, each with hundreds of partners, big NGOs. Some of them were huge networks in their own right. So thousands and thousands of groups which were working for, against to tackle poverty, to tackle climate change, to tackle all these things, were now putting stuff on that we could also use and share amongst everybody. So everybody's little bit was shared with everybody. And at one point I remember we counted how many hits we had that year, not including One World US, which had a lot, as you can imagine, but not even including them. And I think it was 250 million.
Wow.
And this was all done, by us in the cottage and other little tiny groups doing little bits and pieces. And I went to Italy once on the invitation of some Italians who wanted to start a One World Italy, And as I got off the plane, there were the two blokes who did it in one of their flats, And I said, which one are you? Are you Fabio or are you Ambrogio? And he said, I am Ambrogio. I am the soul of One World Italy. And I said, I am the soul of One World. And he said, I know. And we have been friends from that moment, of sort of 15 years now. And it was done with people's idealism and passion and commitment. And people worked all hours of the day and night, not because we ever made them or asked them to, but because at last there was a place they could put what they cared about into practice, And it's always this thing, like the Dalai Lama said, if you find something you believe in and you can commit to, then just do it. And don't say, we haven't got money, we haven't got this, we haven't got that, So the first year of One World, becoming a global network in effect, I totted up how much money we had spent and compared it to the BBC. And it was, for everything starting up, startup costs are much higher, and then we had to buy the computers, you had to buy everything.
Yeah.
The first year's costs were the equivalent of 1/4 of 1 day of one department of the BBC.
The people out here might not know that both Tara and Peter are going to be sparring with our resident champion shortly. So we do. I guess we're going to be limited to kind of like 15
I didn't bring
minutes.
the belt. I was expecting to win.
So one of the other reasons that you're on here is because I know you both from training with me, and I'm sure this isn't meant to sound insulting. This is from Corinne on Twitter. As people who train in. And she actually put in your later years. I don't think that's quite the way of wording it, but
That's fine.
I guess she means as someone who doesn't train, who's 26 years old or whatever. What are the advantages and disadvantages of training twice a week?
Oh, I think it's absolutely vital that just because you're older, you don't stop doing this. I mean, I used to do aerobic dance, all kinds of things from the time I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I've done it all my life, and I'm not intending to stop now, because I reckon that instead of being 60, then going on to 70, and then 80,
Yeah.
like this. I want to go 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. That's what I want to do. I want to be in
And-
peak condition, happy
You've got
and
so
well.
much energy.
Yeah.
Just retaining that.
And also, not only the training, but your diabetes.
Yes,
As,
absolutely. My
okay.
diabetes, a combination of the diet
Yeah.
and moving about means that my doctor said I had diabetes and that I would have to take all these pills and blah, blah, blah. And I said I really didn't want to. And he said, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to. And then I remember coming home and saying to Peter, I wish I had 3 months before I had to go to see him again. I would sort it, and then I'm sorry for the doctor, but he actually fell off his bike and broke his shoulder. And I didn't see him for 3 months. And when I came back, he looked at my results and he kind of went, he said, it's a miracle. He just couldn't believe it.
Diabetic.
It just went, instead of shooting up, it just turned around, came back all the way through diabetes, all the way through pre-diabetes to, I was basically fine. And
diet and exercise.
and so he said, I don't have to take this pills anymore. And so, obviously I have to keep an eye on my diet very closely. I shouldn't be eating this biscuit. But, basically it just transformed my life really having, and also one thing is that because I'm a writer, I'm always sitting and writing for hours and hours and hours. And I have to kind of remember to get up and stretch a bit, do a few squats, whatever. Yeah. And that combination of moving a bit and eating properly has just changed everything. So thank you, Darren.
Oh, thank you. But
Wonderful.
and that we got another question from Charlotte on Twitter, which says basically, what are the best things that you've had from training? But I think you've probably covered that in the, we've covered it in the...
Well, also you remind me to drink water, which I always forget. You remind me to try and rest.
And you get to see Darren twice a week. Makes you
And
feel
to
really
laugh.
intelligent.
To laugh.
And just laugh at Darren.
I think laughing...
They sit me on a seat with a cushion on just to laugh at me.
I think that kind of fun, because as you've probably noticed, I'm quite engaged in serious things a lot. But I also do like to laugh, and so it cheers me up always when I think the world is not working properly, and Darren comes along and everything cheers up.
And I will say that you two very, very rarely cancel. There's we both have clients that probably have about a 70-80% success rate or
That'd
whatever.
be nice.
So
We're pretty reliable, aren't we? Because we're keen, because we really believe in it.
And also, Tara's fantastic at doing what she's told.
True.
Chris is my second most moany client. I literally tell him to do something. Oh, why are we doing it that way? Oh, not these. Oh, really? I don't think I'll ever hear that from you. It's kind of, he won't deny it.
No, I like a good whinge.
But I'm not always obedient. I'm obedient to you, but I'm not obedient to everybody. And I think one of the things I saw on your website was somebody who asked me, which are the people I've met?
This is the next question.
Okay,
So
you ask it, yeah.
So again, we can be quite quick on this. You might not want to answer the second part.
No.
Who on the long list of people you've met would you like to meet again? And is there anyone on that list you wouldn't like to meet again?
Okay, I'm very happy to meet again all the people on the list I gave you and many more. The person I wouldn't like to meet again is somebody I didn't actually put on the list and I didn't think of till later, who is Silvio Berlusconi. And I didn't exactly meet him because I will never shake the hands of somebody I really disapprove of.
Like Ronda Rousey?
And so, for example, there was also a British... so anyway, Berlusconi made this big speech pretending he was going to give all this money to help close the global digital divide, help the poor countries so that people can get the benefit of the internet. And everybody stood up and cheered and, wow, this is amazing, we didn't expect that. And I was the UK delegate, the people's delegate, to the G8 summit, which is where this was all happening. And I thought, I don't believe it. So I sat tight and I wouldn't clap and I wouldn't cheer. And I kept thinking that his hoodlums are going to come and, duff me up or something. But anyway, I wouldn't. And there was a British politician too. He was our climate representative actually at one of the COPs. And he came out with all this stuff and everybody was like, wow, it's good. And I thought, it's not true what he's saying. It's actually not correct what he's saying. And when he went around glad-handing everybody afterwards, I just took a step back so I wouldn't shake his hand. A year later, he was in jail.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, he was just telling lies, and I knew it. And he told lies about something else, and he was found out.
So this list that I actually put on Twitter, because of the characters, I only
Yeah.
put, obviously you can extend it
The
beyond
Dalai
this.
Lama was wonderful.
So I put a Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
Archbishop Desmond
Yeah, he's a
Tutu.
wonderful person. Yeah, absolutely.
He looks really cool as well. He looks like a guy I'd like to have as a granddad.
Yeah,
So I just like he just looks a good.
but he
a good guy, I like
he
him.
is so sharp.
Right.
He sees through it. He'll read you in a flash.
Right,
We
okay,
did
I'll be
this.
knackered then, wouldn't
We did this film with him in South Africa just before Mandela was released at the time of the referendum, yes or no referendum, and the cameraman was a local cameraman. He bashed him on the back like this and said, "You don't believe a word of this stuff, do you, my good fellow," sort of thing. With Peter, he had a serious discussion about theology. I was so overcome with what I'd been hearing from him, I kind of hid. I wasn't ready to speak, you know.
Yeah.
And then later, I followed him to see if I could have a private word rather than a public thing like this, you know. And he saw me down a corridor like this. He said, come. And I went up to him very nervously, you know. And he just opened his arms like this, and he hugged me and put my head on his shoulder and patted me and stroked me. And that's exactly what I needed, because I was so stirred by the things he'd said about the injustices that his congregation had suffered and what had happened. They were so unbelievably courageous, you know, really. I mean, what we do is nothing compared to what those people did. I mean, one woman we spoke to, you know, she'd had, you know, those flaming tires put round and, you know, I mean, and yet they come out, you know, compassionate towards people, forgiving the people who'd done these things. Unbelievable, you know. And so I was so moved, and he just knew what I needed was to be just held and comforted like a grandfather.
So also on here, we may have covered it anyway, but I'll just give you the opportunity.
Yeah.
Naomi Campbell, Mother Teresa, Oprah Winfrey, Carl Sagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Al Gore.
Sagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was great.
What a mind.
He's great. And I'll tell you a lovely story he said. Okay? He said, he was one of the people who really turned me on to climate change, by the way. But the other thing he said was about nuclear power. And he had such a good analogy. Everybody should know this. He said the nuclear race, you know, and this idea that is deterrence, whatever, is such rubbish, you know. Because he said it's like two blokes standing in a room which is filling up with petrol, and they're striking matches to see who has the most matches. And I thought, absolutely. It's nonsense, you know, that sort of nuclear deterrence is going to be anything other than an accident waiting to happen, you know.
3 people, alive or dead, that you'd like to sit down and have dinner
Oh,
with.
right. You did prep me and I forgot. Oh, gosh. Okay, Mandela, Gandhi. There's a no-brainers really for me.
Okay.
I don't want to pick another man, but I suppose it would be Thoreau, who had a little hut in the woods and lived there. And he was one of the early heroes of mine, because I remember I was sweeping the floor one day when I was a young mum, and I heard it on the radio, a quote from his book, which said that in his hut he just had a bed, a desk, a chair, and really that was kind of it. And he picked up 3 pebbles, and then one day he thought, this is just more clutter, and he threw it out. And he just focused, you know, on the essentials. I remember stopping. I was just so bowled over by this. Somebody who'd actually tried to think, what is it we really, really need? You know, what do we really care about? And so I went and bought his book, Walden, and loved it. And so, he decided on an act of civil disobedience, because the American government at the time wanted to kind of create a war against Mexico, and he didn't want his taxes to be paid for it, so he refused, and he was put in jail for a whole day, you know. But it was a symbolic thing, and he wrote about why, you know. And then of course this was read by people like Gandhi and Tolstoy. He's another one. Could I have 4? I could have Tolstoy. These people all read each other and learned from each other, and they're all in the same line of people who say, we're just ordinary people. I mean, Gandhi, what was he? You know, he wasn't a prince or something. You know, he was a poor kid, you know. And I believe that all people, whoever they are, if they decide on what really matters, can really make a difference. Look at Oprah. She was a really poor kid. She slept in the veranda. There wasn't room in the house even for her. She was sexually abused when she was a small child. She, used all those experiences to become a person who could be empathic with others. And that's what made her great. The fact that she could say the things that nobody else was saying. And when she was a kid, her mum and their friends used to say, "Oh, this girl, she's a talker." And rather than take it as an insult, she used all that, and look at her now. And when she made The Colour Purple about black slaves, and I guess the person I would like to meet again, because I only met her for fleetingly just to say hello for 1 second, I would like to meet her properly and wake her up to not just the injustice in America to women and to black people and in general, but to global injustice. And really, I'd love to do a show with her where we really talked about global injustice, because it can be solved. It's not something insoluble. It can be done. We're just not doing it.
Wow, that's an awesome note to finish this podcast on. I love it. Thank you. I think this has been one of my...
Is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to say before we... Sorry.
Yes, I would like to say that if people would like to know more about the immediate work we're doing now, we do lots of things, but if they look at www.oneclimate.org, written out ONE climate.org, and also if you want to tweet @OneClimate. And retweet stuff you like, please. And we're off to the Paris climate talks next week, and we'll be tweeting as much as we can and doing a lot of work. And we're also making a documentary on renewable energy and how it could actually solve all our energy problems and create more global justice in the process. Because guess what? Who really has the wind and the sun? Poor countries. They could actually become economically viable on the back of renewable energies. We could make the world a fair and level place. So why not?
oneclimate.co.uk.
No. oneclimate.org.
Sorry, and I retweet some of your stuff @OneClimate on Twitter.
Thank you very much. This has been probably my favourite episode ever.
It's very kind of you.
Check out designweb.co.uk, Lisa Mattresses and Optimal State. And this is Slaphead and Giraffe. See you, buddy. We're out.
Nice one.
Wow.